This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. Aw crap, I'm late, aren't I? Yeah, I know I've made these end of year videos before with an eye on providing helpful buying advice around Christmas, but I vastly underestimated just how much stuff I'd be doing in December. It's alright though, because I won this giant banana for my son. Which leads me to the first week in January, where it almost feels like I'm making this video out of shame. I missed the boat, I'm now swimming. But 2024 was still an amazing year for video games with a kind of variety that we aren't always blessed with, and where I reckon there wasn't one clear runaway for Game of the Year either. Everyone just did a really good job with the game they were given to develop, and it puts us in a great position where most of it is amazing and can keep you entertained for dozens of hours. Am I expecting 2025 to be just as good? I mean, hopefully. It's been pretty shit so far though, I'm not gonna lie. Literally just one gacha mobile game so far. It'll pick up, I'm sure. I'd love to be a fly on the wall during the meeting when Nintendo decided that both Peach and Zelda needed standalone games this year. It's been a long time coming for both of these characters, and fans have been crying out for this to happen for years, so just how do Princess Peach Showtime and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom stack up? Well, they're both pretty good and give their respective characters an outing that plays to their individual strengths, but I think I have to choose a game that functions like a Tears of the Kingdom adjacent and lets you summon beds on demand. Hey, it's what I look for in a video game, it's very important. Zelda hasn't been the star of her own game for nearly 30 years, and even then that game probably doesn't count. So Nintendo really did have to start from almost scratch with Echoes of Wisdom. I say almost because Zelda famously has an association with magic, which lets you mess around with a side of these games that is only slightly touched on in traditional Zelda games. I also like that she can't cause any direct damage apart from the swordsman transformation, which leads to some really interesting puzzle solving in everything from regular encounters to dungeon crawling and big boss fights. Echoes of Wisdom is a truly refreshing change of pace from more combat-focused Legend of Zelda outings, and it's able to give Zelda her own tangible personality as a protagonist. I don't know if we'll get more, but I feel like we could, and that's enough hope for me. It'll keep me going for years, honestly. Sometimes you come across a game with a title so wacky and bizarre that it either ends up being an attention-seeking indie game with little to nothing to offer the world, or a ballsy concept that is able to pull through with a lot of its ideas. Laurelai and the Laser Eyes wins the award for Best Name of 2024, which is very prestigious, but not quite as valuable as #1 on this video. This is a difficult game to explain, since it's classified as a puzzle game, but the vibes it's going for are so clearly meant to be so much more than that. I guess it's horror adjacent rather than flat out scary, which helps to blanket the whole game in this surreal atmosphere, since Laurelai and the Laser Eyes uses this premise and the flexible nature of its natural laws of time and space to absolutely raw dog your mind with challenging puzzles. That's probably my main takeaway from all of this. Yes, the ambience is unnerving and you slowly piece together key plot points as you go, but you reveal more of this game only by solving some seriously tough puzzles. The sheer variety in these puzzles will almost guarantee that you end up stuck on a handful at various points in the game, but there's a lot of deciphering codes that I have always loved whenever something like that has turned up in my life. There's so much to do in Laurelai, and you never feel like you're picking up momentum of how you're solving puzzles, since there's always something new and always a different approach that the game is hiding for when you become a bit complacent. I like puzzle games with a clever bit of framing to them, and there's absolute bucket loads here. You gotta keep the puzzles mindfucky. Do you know how long people have been trying to get me to play some Yakuza? You know, I like Metal Gear, which is very over-the-top and Japanese, and so obviously a franchise which is as over-the-top and Japanese as you can reasonably expect would suit me really nicely. 2024 saw Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth released, with Like a Dragon being Yakuza's name in Japan, so it's lucky I found it at all. And that luck is tinged with, like, a small amount of regret, I suppose? Like, you guys have known that this would be my jam for years. Why didn't more of you pressure me to play some? I fucking love this. Yakuza is wonderful in general, but the 8th game is seeking to capitalize on all the new stuff that the 7th game changed. A lot of this I've researched since my Yakuza V card was only recently punched, but I am slightly obsessed with the caliber of game I've got here. It's wonderfully made, with some real care given to so many different parts of Infinite Wealth, but the charm here is how ridiculous so much of this game is. Of course, the RPG combat has been improved since the last game, and we're generally moving in the right direction with a larger, more detailed world, but I won't lie to you, you don't tend to notice most of that when you're face to face with any one of Infinite Wealth's eccentric characters. It's really fun to play this game in bed with my fiance because she'll be reading a book like a nerd, and look up and suddenly I'm making random men fight each other, and then there's this giant robot vacuum cleaner, and now there's this man baby with other men babies. It's a hard game to explain, basically. And now I have to play all of them. Konami doing anything with their existing properties in 2024 apart from exploitative pachinko machines is frankly a terrifying prospect. Hiring a developer whose recent skills of making horror games have been okay at best and seriously questionable at worst rapidly starts to sound like a specially curated recipe for disaster. And that's before you throw in the fact that these cowboys are remaking one of the best horror games ever made. Silent Hill 2 should have been a train wreck that shows the gap between itself and the Resi 4 remake from last year. And yet somehow, against all odds, the new Silent Hill 2 remake is shockingly good without feeling like a completely different game. I feel like that second bit is incredibly important and equally as impressive, since the original game was able to have this oppressively creepy atmosphere in part because of technical limitations. That's why the town is so foggy, and why James is so useless in combat, and so the worry with a modern remake is that all of this would be forgotten in favour of an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter that resembles Pyramid Head being dropped into the middle of Gears of War. Thankfully, everything seems to have worked out for the best. The Silent Hill 2 remake is fiercely faithful to the original, but with enough modernisation to make it more palatable for modern audiences. No longer do I have to point at this grim, blocky mess from decades ago and try in vain to convince modern gamers that this is the best horror game ever made. I don't quite think that the remake surpasses the original, since the awkward controls and the visuals kind of mesh really nicely with the bizarre vibes of Silent Hill, but I have to applaud every effort to bring Silent Hill 2 up to speed. Pyramid Head genuinely has never been scarier. Clock Tower next please, thanks! Am I allowed to include early access games in this video? Oh wait, it's my video, so fuck it, we move! And that's because Hades 2 technically hasn't come out yet. In roughly the same way as Minecraft technically came out in 2011, and the public beta was just a figment of our collective imaginations that lasted for a whole 2 years. Anyway, Hades 2 is a game that you can play and enjoy in the now times, and it's far enough through development at this point that I don't feel too bad including it, because let's be real here, Hades 2 is one of the best games of 2024 and was always likely to be. Supergiant Games don't make sequels very often, so clearly they were listening to everyone who was saying how jaw-droppingly incredible the first game was. Hades 1 is a generational experience that was nominated 9 times at the Game Awards that year, so any kind of sequel would just have to make some kind of improvements if you can. And somehow, Hades 2 does make improvements. I'm hesitant to be too excited about this game since we are still swimming around in the early access pool, but all the signs are there that the final release will be hugely impressive. Hey, maybe if I wait long enough in 2025 it will come out for real, and if it does come out in 2025, do I put it on 2025's video? This could be complicated. The remarkable thing is that Hades 2 probably doesn't need early access anymore, since what they have now is so clearly worthy of being a follow-up to Hades, but evidently there's more to be added here. I suppose the story needs a proper ending, but that's like the only glaring absence at this point. The magic system has been revamped and a lot of the areas have been expanded and generally improved, but it mostly feels like more of the same amazing Hades gameplay that I'm used to. Supergiant have kept their standards high and haven't paused their work at all, in much the same way that Chronos stops you from pausing the game as the Titan of Time is allowed to do. I feel like we're in good hands here. The fact that I've spent most of the past month finally understanding and playing the Pokemon trading card game, this time on mobile devices, goes to show that there still is and will always be a place for card game video games, regardless how modern gaming becomes. Balatro picks up this concept and takes it for a ride, since conceptually, the idea that a card game that is quite literally just a card game would be nominated for Game of the Year is frankly insane, and the sort of prediction that no one would ever have made at the start of the year. I think the best way I can describe Balatro without being too insulting is that it's the sort of card game that has been specifically engineered for people who don't usually play or even like card games. Again, I'm trying not to be too insulting, but part of the appeal of Balatro is that the mechanics are very accessible and are able to cut through a lot of the bullshit that typically puts newcomers off of playing a card game. It's marketed as solitaire meets poker, which is partly true, but it's mainly there to draw in crowds who are familiar with one or both of those games. Solitaire is pretty easy to understand, and even if you haven't played poker, you'd probably want to understand it. How else am I going to win my money? With its shoestring budget, Balatro is simply aiming to be the best card game it can be, and you would be surprised how addictive that can be. Its infectious personality elevates this game from simple card game to something that consumes my life in a seriously concerning way, and you should all count yourselves very fortunate that there's a video available for you to watch right now because it was touch and go. Luck isn't as much of a factor, which puts a greater emphasis on strategy, and all that means is that victory feels amazing and defeat isn't quite as devastating. Balatro is a prime, just one more, game where the pacing is perfectly designed to keep you coming back again and again. Is it bizarre that such a simplistic game is rubbing shoulders with huge big balls AAA games this year? Yeah, a bit, but it shows the value in executing a simple concept exceedingly well. When the mobile version comes out, we're all fucked. As if to reinforce a point, UFO 50 came out swinging this year to put some respect back in the corner of mini-game compilations. You know, like WarioWare and Mario Party and Cooking Mama? Yeah, okay, Cooking Mama 2. But calling UFO 50 a minigame compilation would be missing the point entirely. It's a compilation for sure, but carefully structured with 50 beefy video games courtesy of the team of indie developers that worked on this game that all have a level of interconnectivity that demonstrates just how much care and thought has been put into UFO 50. You've quite literally got 50 different games, some of which are co-op games or versus games, some are puzzle games or platformers or RPGs, and while some of these are obviously pretty short experiences, others will keep you busy for hours on end. When I first heard about UFO 50, I was immediately reminded of Action 52, which was a notorious attempt at doing roughly the same thing in the early 1990s, but whereas all of those are terrible, UFO 50 is the same concept given so much more justice. Like, all the justice. An interesting side effect of the aesthetic of UFO 50 being so 80s and being fictionally set in the 80s is that most of these games are really fucking hard. It's incredibly refreshing to play a game that doesn't hold your hand and doesn't bombard you with tutorials, which would never work anyway given how many different games you've got at your disposal. Some of these games like Valbrace and Overbold are so brutally difficult that they could be their own standalone indie games that would occupy you for days at a time if you let them. There's genuine value to how you can throw yourself into anything at any time without having to plod through hours of world building, although I personally found a lot of mileage in playing the games in chronological order, since you can see all the callbacks and Easter eggs carried through from previous games. There is a staggering amount of effort behind UFO 50, and given its 8-year dev cycle, it all starts to click together. I don't know how we get more games like this, but I'd like to put my request in now, so we might get more in like a decade's time. Gotta invest early, you know? These Final Fantasy VII episodes might be sporadic with their releases, but I'm yet to find someone who's complaining about it. It's the internet. If you give me enough time, I'm sure I can find them. If anything, having them spread out this far gives each release its own weight and allows it enough space to be its own entity. And since it's been a few years since the first episode, I was pretty excited to revisit this world with all its wonderful characters. In the Final Fantasy VII Remake, you could kinda tell that the devs didn't just want to go for a straight retelling of the original, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is where this remake series fully commits to the decision to forge its own path and not be so tied to the story that everyone is expecting. The side effect is that the narrative is a lot more complicated now, and I'm hoping that future games are able to keep going with this new story without getting too caught up with parallel universes and what I'm sure could turn into time travel and a bunch of other bullshit. So for now, this all works and I love it, but just a thought for the future. Elsewhere, the combat has undergone numerous levels of refinement so that the blend of real-time action and tactical planning feels more rewarding and dynamic in a way that didn't always happen in the first game. It's encouraging that Square feel the need to work on parts of the game that might not seem like they need an extra layer of polish, since it feels to me like the devs aren't likely to get complacent between now and when this series is finally finished. As it is now, Rebirth is the continuation of all the momentum put into motion by the first episode, and I'm hoping they can carry this forward for future ones. Stay away from time travel though, please, and thank you. Hey, things are going well for Atlus lately, aren't they? The last couple of years has been pretty solid, but 2024 especially has been one hit after another. We've had Persona 3 Reload, a really good remake of Persona 3 that brings one of my favourite Persona games onto modern consoles and to new audiences. Unicorn Overload was a nice surprise that has some funky story beats to it, and some key creatives responsible for making Persona 5 so stylish and awesome combined their powers to create Metaphor ReFantazio, which is the sort of game that really doesn't try very hard to hide its ties to Persona. Granted, it's not a Persona game and it's not even a Persona spin-off, but come on, they know what they're doing here. Metaphor was born out of frustration over a lack of creative control and the shift away from modern Japan to a medieval fantasy land, but with all the characteristics that make Persona so fun and unique, is such a refreshing change of pace. It does mean that you're surrounded by all these bizarre fantasy names like Haizme and Hythlodaeus, and Will. I never get to play as myself. Oh, this is a wonderful game! Metaphor is an aggressively good game, honestly, and you can tell that those clever fuckers poured their heart and soul into making it, with such a stunning visual style that immediately transports you right into the middle of its richly beautiful world. It also tackles some strong themes with the level of nuance that is shockingly absent from a lot of similar games, which speaks to the level of ambition that is somehow matched by just a dump truck full of quality. It might not be Persona, but its DNA can be found running all throughout Metaphor. Let these guys make whatever game they want. Give them the keys to the kingdom if you have to. It's roughly at this point that I realized that maybe I should have talked about Shadow of the Erdtree. I don't know, I can see why it was nominated for Game of the Year, and it is definitely deserving of being considered one of the best gaming experiences of 2024. But it's hard to shake the feeling that a lot of its qualities are built upon a game that came out in 2022. It's not like it's a sequel or a remake, it's an expansion to an existing game from 2 years ago, and while it's some of the most fun I've had this year, I can't in good faith talk about it now. I can talk about Astrobot though. I remember playing through Astro's playthrough when I first got my PS5 and thought, wow, this is so much better than a free tech demo should be. They could turn this into a full paid release and probably do really well. I feel so fucking rewarded right now. Astrobot feels like a spiritual successor to something like Super Mario Galaxy, which is just about as high a praise comes when you're talking about a platformer. The freedom of movement, the ultra-precise controls, and some of the most imaginative level design I've seen in any 3D platformer all combine to create one of the purest, most enjoyable experiences I've ever had with a video game. There's a real charm to seeing Astro throw himself around with all these funky gadgets, helping to keep new levels feeling fresh and exciting, and yet there's never a sense that Astrobot needs to change anything too radically to keep you engaged. There's no gimmicks or some random dark backstory thrown in to catch you off guard. It's just pure, undiluted platforming at the highest quality possible. I don't know how Sony did it, but you've got the best game of the year that shows off some features unique to the PS5, like the haptic triggers, and now you've got a new mascot that, at least in terms of pure quality, can go toe-to-toe with Nintendo and Mario. I want more, and to not wait ages for a new one. Figure it out, Sony, you've done well so far. And yeah, those are the best games of 2024. Do you agree, or is there something else you'd have at number one? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and hit subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. The last video I made was about games that predicted the future, so make sure you go watch that. And I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Sarah Mallion, The Green Scorpion, and Scott Riker. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.